Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. She tapped her wine glass, smiled at the guests and said, Lynn has generously decided to share part of her wedding fund with her sister. Everyone clapped except me because I hadn't. Hi, I'm Lauren, and just 5 months before my wedding, my own mother tried to humiliate me in front of our entire family by giving away $30,000 I had saved since I was 18. But what she didn't expect was that I'd fight back with the law. Not more silence. You won't believe what happened next. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I always thought the hardest part of planning a wedding would be deciding between ivory and pearl napkins, or maybe figuring out if the chicken entree could also be gluten-free. Turns out the real difficulty was much simpler and far heavier. It was opening a letter from my mother. That Saturday started like any other. Sunlight poured through the tall window in our apartment, catching on the dust Ethan hadn't vacuumed under the dining table. I didn't mind. His half-read architectural magazines were still spread across the counter next to our budget printouts and a half-eaten muffin we were sharing. We were going through the seating chart again. What about putting Rachel next to Uncle David? Ethan asked, pencil in hand. They used to talk a lot, right? I nodded but wasn't fully there. My eyes kept drifting toward the envelope sitting untouched beside my coffee cup. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's looping cursive, always neat, always precise. The front read, "Private from Mom." I hadn't opened it yet. Something about it felt too heavy for a morning like this. Above our table was a photo Ethan framed for me, my college graduation. I was smiling, holding my diploma, standing next to my best friend, Jasmine. My parents weren't there. They had been in New York that weekend visiting Sophie. That picture used to hurt, but lately it just reminded me who always showed up. You okay? Ethan asked, following my gaze. I blinked and smiled softly. Yeah, just distracted. He didn't push. That was one of the things I loved about him. He could see right through me but never forced me to say more than I was ready to. The envelope stayed sealed until after brunch. The next day we met my mom and Sophie at a little restaurant downtown. Polished wood, soft music, tiny vases with one bloom each. Sophie was already on her phone when we arrived, thumbs tapping furiously while her latte cooled. Margaret, Mom, gave me her usual once-over before smiling too warmly. You look practical, she said, adjusting her napkin like it had insulted her. We made it through appetizers with minimal friction, but the moment the entrees arrived, so did the topic. Sophie's engagement is back on, Mom announced, like she was unveiling a new charity. I glanced at Sophie, who gave a sheepish grin. We're still figuring things out. The date's not locked yet, and well, weddings are expensive. I stirred my tea. They are. It's so fortunate that you and Ethan are in a stable place, Mom continued, laying her hand over mine. Not everyone has that kind of security, especially these days. There it was, the beginning of a request dressed up as praise. Sophie looked up from her phone just long enough to smile. Yeah, I mean, Lauren's always been the responsible one. I tried to steer the conversation toward cake vendors. Ethan, sitting beside me, shifted slightly. I felt his hand rest gently on my knee under the table. A small signal he could tell I was bracing for something. That night I sat alone in our living room. Ethan had gone to bed early. The envelope was still unopened on the coffee table, resting like it had waited long enough. I broke the seal slowly, careful not to rip the paper. Inside was a single typed page. Dear Lauren, given the nature of family and the importance of balance, your father and I have discussed a proposal that we believe would serve everyone involved. We recommend reallocating a portion, specifically $30,000 of your wedding fund, to support your sister's upcoming ceremony. Sophie is doing her best, but her circumstances are not as fortunate as yours. We know you'll do the right thing. Love, Mom. My hands didn't shake, but something in my chest did. A slow, invisible tremor. I read it again and again. There was no threat, no demand, just a typed smile behind every line. You have enough. She has less. That's how family works. That was always the undercurrent in our house. Not fairness, balance. I stood up and crossed the room to the bookshelf where our wedding materials were stored in a cream-colored box with gold ribbon trim. Inside were unsent invitations, vendor brochures, and fabric samples I'd collected for months. I placed the letter on top and closed the lid gently, as if sealing something deeper than paper. A few minutes later, Ethan came out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes. He looked at me, then at the closed box. He didn't ask what was in the letter. Instead, he sat beside me and asked softly, "Are you going to let her do this?" I didn't answer. I just reached forward, pulled the ribbon taut around the box, and tied it into a simple knot. Some families trade guilt like wedding gifts, wrapped nicely, handed with a smile but full of strings. I used to think my mother's brand of guilt was subtle, but maybe I just got used to how heavy it always felt. It was late spring when I found the courage to talk about it. The farmer's market in Charlottesville had just shifted into its summer rhythm. Rows of lavender bunches tied with twine, jars of honey with cloth caps, and teenagers playing acoustic covers under a sycamore tree. Jasmine and I met near a bakery tent that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. She handed me a small paper cup of iced herbal tea. "You look like you haven't slept in 3 days. Try 2, I muttered, sipping. Apparently, insomnia kicks in when your wedding fund becomes collateral damage. Community property. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You still haven't told her?" I shook my head. "It's not that simple." She looked at me for a moment, then leaned closer. "Lauren, is your name legally on the account?" That question hit harder than I expected. I had spent so long drowning in emotions, anger, confusion, the kind of hurt that felt both petty and enormous, that I hadn't thought to check the most basic fact. By Monday morning, I was sitting in a booth at the downtown branch of Blue Ridge Federal. The wood-paneled walls smelled like pine cleaner and old paper. I slid my ID across the desk to a woman named Carol, who smiled without really looking at me. It only took a few clicks. "Yes," she confirmed. "It's a custodial account that matured when you turned 18. You've had sole ownership since then." I nodded as if I already knew, but something inside me exhaled. Not relief, not yet, but the first crack in a glass wall I'd been pressing against for years. Back at the apartment, my phone lit up with a message from Mom. "True family shares, especially when one sister is drowning." I stared at the words for a long time. She didn't ask. She framed it like duty, like withholding meant betrayal. An hour later, Sophie called. Her voice was syrupy. "Hey Laura. Just wanted to say I'm so happy for you. Your venue looks dreamy." I knew where this was going. "I was at a bridal shop yesterday," she went on. "Just browsing, dreaming a little. Tried on a dress I really loved, but you know how things are." I kept my voice flat. "Yeah." She waited, then added, "I mean, if it happens, it happens. I'm just hoping something works out." It wasn't the words. It was the tone, that lilting, breathy hopefulness she used like a fishing line. I hung up after some polite murmur of support and stared at the wall for a good 5 minutes. That evening, Ethan came home to find me sitting on the floor surrounded by financial printouts and old documents. He didn't say anything, just crouched beside me and asked, "Want a glass of water or a hammer?" I managed to laugh. "Maybe both." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Call her," he said gently. "The lawyer. You deserve answers from someone who doesn't lace them with guilt." The next afternoon, I met Nina Carter at a small law office tucked above a travel agency. She was in her 40s, calm, with dark curls clipped into a neat bun and glasses that made her look like she never missed details. I laid everything out. The account, the letter, the brunch, the silence between texts. She listened carefully, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "This isn't about legality, you're covered there. This is about permission." I blinked. "Permission?" She nodded. "Whether you still think you need it, whether you're still trying to avoid being called selfish. Your money is legally yours, that's not in question. But emotionally, that's where they've set the trap." Her words didn't sting. They landed like truth usually does, quiet and clean. That night I stared at my phone. The last message from Mom still sat there, glowing under the timestamp. "True family shares, especially when one sister is drowning." I typed, "No Mom, the answer is no." My heart beat harder than it should have. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't even angry. It was just a line. Her reply came in less than a minute. "You'll regret this at my birthday." I stared at those words for a while, and then slowly I deleted the entire thread. Not out of fear but preparation. The next morning, Jasmine dropped by with a small paper sachet tied with lavender string. For clarity, she said, keep it where you store important things. I placed it gently into the same cream box as the letter. The ribbon was still tied, but the contents inside had shifted somewhere between guilt and peace. I was learning to choose the latter. She called it a birthday dinner, but from the moment I walked into the restaurant, something about the air felt too staged, too smooth, like a play about to begin where I already knew I wasn't the star. It was a Friday night in mid-October. The restaurant was dimly lit, all warm wood and flickering tea lights. Margaret, Mom, had chosen an Italian place she adored for its sense of tradition, which meant a long communal table, elaborate place cards, and just enough pretension to keep people stiff. Ethan squeezed my hand as we entered. You okay? I'm fine, I said, lying with the ease of someone who's had decades of practice. Earlier that week, Ethan had warned me gently but clearly, your mom doesn't throw events, she stages them. He wasn't wrong. Gold table runners lined the length of the table. Bowls of olives and capers sat untouched. There was jazz playing overhead, low enough to seem casual, but I could hear it skipping faintly. The record hadn't been cleaned well. The place settings were perfect. Lynn, sweetheart, Margaret called as we approached. She stood up, arms out. I let her hug me, her perfume clinging like dust. So glad you could make it. I smiled tightly. Happy birthday. Sophie was already seated, phone face down, smiling just enough to appear gracious. Jasmine was a few seats away, already reading the room. Dinner started. Civil small talk floated up and down the table. Real estate, college plans, someone's recent cruise to Nova Scotia. I nodded through it. Forked spinach onto my plate, tried not to fidget. Ethan stayed close, sensing my unease. When dessert arrived, thin slices of tiramisu drizzled with espresso syrup, Margaret reached for her wine glass and tapped it gently with a spoon. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I just want to say, she began, standing. Thank you all for being here to celebrate such a meaningful birthday. 60 is a powerful number. Maturity, grace, and knowing when to put family first. I glanced down at my plate, feeling Ethan's hand tighten slightly around mine. Margaret continued, smiling as she looked around the table. And as a symbol of that spirit, Lauren has decided to share part of her wedding fund with Sophie to help her build something beautiful. Just as she's building with Ethan, a pause followed, not silence, just the kind of pause where people aren't sure if they should clap. Then a few did, lightly uncertain. Ethan didn't move, Jasmine sat still. My breath froze. Sophie didn't say a word. She just smiled, a small knowing smile, the kind that didn't need words to feel loud. I stood slowly, my voice was calm. That's not true. The clinking stopped. So did the music, though I'm not sure if that was real or imagined. All I could hear was the pulse in my ears. Margaret blinked, then laughed, a soft clipped sound. Lauren, darling, let's not make this uncomfortable. It already is. Her smile vanished. After all we've done for you. Her voice sharpened just enough to cut. You act like this money fell from the sky. We sacrificed for that, and now you hoard it while your sister can't even secure a venue. From across the table, Sophie added lightly, you don't even need it, you already have him. I looked at her, but not with anger, just disappointment, so much that I almost cried. Margaret stepped forward. Don't embarrass us. I didn't move, and then without warning, her hand came down fast and sharp across my cheek. The sound rang like glass breaking. I didn't stagger, I didn't cry. I simply stood there, my face stinging, watching her hand lower slowly as if she were realizing what she'd just done. No one moved. Utensils lay frozen on plates. Someone at the far end of the table whispered something I couldn't hear. Jasmine stood quietly and came to my side. I turned to her. Can you call now? I said, my voice even. I want to file charges tonight. Her eyes widened slightly, she nodded. Margaret took a step back, her face pale now. Her voice caught somewhere between apology and rage, but I didn't wait for either. I picked up my cloth napkin, folded it gently, and set it down beside my untouched dessert. Then I turned, stood straight, and walked down the length of the table toward the exit. I didn't rush, I didn't speak. I didn't look back, because there comes a moment when dignity isn't loud. It's just leaving the room before someone makes you believe you should stay. For years, silence was my currency. I paid it to keep the peace at school, at holidays, at home. I held my tongue like a ribbon wrapped around my dignity, thinking restraint was maturity. But sitting in that courthouse hallway with my hands folded over a thin legal folder, I finally realized I had nothing left to trade. The courthouse in Charlottesville wasn't grand, just beige walls, gray carpet, and the scent of toner and nerves. Ethan sat beside me in a navy sweater, one leg crossed over the other, calm as ever. He didn't try to fill the silence. He never did. That was his way of saying, I trust you to be ready when you're ready. When I was 12, I cried after a school talent show. I had sung off-key, forgotten a verse, and felt humiliated. That night, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. It's better to be quiet than to make a scene, she said while washing dishes. People remember scenes. I believed her for 2 decades. I acted accordingly. Now I was here to do the opposite. Miss Chun, a clerk called. We stood together, Ethan giving my hand a small squeeze before I followed the woman into a modest courtroom. Wood-paneled walls, rows of empty benches, 2 reporters in the back murmuring to each other. On the other side of the aisle, my mother sat composed in a pale lilac jacket, hands folded neatly on her lap. Sophie sat beside her, chin high, her gaze fixed on some invisible point above the judge's bench. Nina Carter stood beside me at the plaintiff's table. She adjusted her blazer but didn't glance down at her notes. She didn't need them. The judge entered, an older woman with sharp glasses and a tired expression. She reviewed the docket quickly, then invited us to proceed. Nina opened with precision. Your Honor, this is not a case about emotion. This is a case about accountability for a public act of physical assault with multiple witnesses and clear digital evidence. Margaret's attorney, a man in his 60s with a forced smile, countered swiftly. It was a regrettable family disagreement, not a criminal act. A moment of passion misinterpreted in the public eye. Then the video played. The room stilled. You could hear the click of the wine glass, Margaret's voice rising in false warmth, the slap, a sound that landed sharper than I remembered. The frame caught my cheek turning, caught the silence that followed, caught the way I stood still afterward as if something internal had broken clean. Nina handed over medical records. Cheek bruising consistent with open palm impact, she said, observed within 12 hours of the incident. Then came 2 written statements from guests, one from Jasmine, one from the waiter. Ethan never let go of my hand. When Margaret was asked to speak, she stood and said, I'm deeply sorry if my daughter felt harmed. That was never my intention. I have always tried to raise my girls with discipline and love. Sometimes strong emotions can be misunderstood. She didn't look at me. The judge sat back for a moment, then spoke without raising her voice. Miss Parker, physical assault, regardless of context, is not protected by familial ties. The law does not exempt what society politely ignores. This court rules in favor of Miss Chun. There was no gasp, no dramatic reaction. The judge continued, Margaret Parker is fined $2,000, ordered to complete an 8-week anger management course, and will maintain no contact with Miss Chun for 6 months. Margaret blinked once, then turned slowly, picked up her purse, and walked out without acknowledging anyone. Not the judge, not the room, and certainly not me. Sophie followed close behind. Outside the courtroom, I exhaled. Not relief, not victory, just breath. For the first time in a long time, it came without tension. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw Sophie leaning against the wall near the exit, her arms crossed, face blank. You made her look like a monster, she said without looking at me. I met her eyes calmly. I didn't need to, I replied. She did that herself. Then I turned away, holding my court-stamped ruling in hand, thin paper, light in weight but heavier than anything silence had ever given me. When people can't control you, they try to control how others see you. I used to think my mother's greatest power was silence, what she refused to say, but I was wrong. Her real strength was crafting stories before anyone else had a chance to speak. It started on a gray Thursday evening. I was adjusting place cards in our apartment, little cream-colored tents with navy blue calligraphy, the kind of detail no one notices unless it's done wrong. My phone rang. It was Melissa, one of my cousins in Raleigh. Hey, she said, voice hesitant. Just wanted to check, is everything okay with the wedding? My stomach tightened. Why? Well, Aunt Linda said she got an email. It said the wedding was off, that you and Ethan were going through something. I froze. I didn't send that. Melissa paused. I didn't think so, but the email looked like it came from your account. After we hung up, I opened my inbox. Nothing in sent, no drafts, no outbox errors. Then Jasmine forwarded me a screenshot from laurenchevins@gmail.com. Subject: change of plans. We regret to inform you that the wedding between Lauren Chan and Ethan Hale has been canceled due to personal reasons. We appreciate your understanding. I stared at it. It wasn't even subtle, the grammar was off, the font was wrong, but the email address was close enough to be dangerous. I showed it to Ethan. He didn't react at first, just took a deep breath and said, "This wasn't a mistake. This was crafted." 2 days later it got worse. An unknown number texted Ethan photos, grainy images of me sitting at a cafe with a man I didn't recognize. My face had been poorly edited onto another woman's body. In one photo, the man was reaching for her hand. Underneath, the message read, "Now you know the truth. She doesn't deserve you." I expected Ethan to explode or at least flinch. Instead, he stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked at me with absolute calm. They think this will rattle us. It won't. We know what's real. We stand still while the truth catches up. I don't remember crying. I remember breathing, shallow, shaky but deliberate. I sat on the floor between our stacked favor boxes and folded napkins, and I let the shame rise and pass like a wave. I refused to drown. The next morning, we hired a digital investigator. His name was Cole, and he wore his tie too tight and his words too few. He traced the email's origin to a device registered at a building in Charlotte. That's where Sophie lived. No direct evidence, but the timing, the method, the signature, it all fit. I didn't respond, not with rage, not with confrontation. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter to our dear friends and family. There have been messages circulating that our wedding has been canceled. That's not true. Ethan and I are getting married on the date we planned with the people who love us. We are aware of the source of the false emails and photos. We will not engage in speculation, but we are documenting the defamation. Truth doesn't need drama. It needs clarity, and that's what we offer. See you in March, Lauren. I attached a screenshot of my real email, added a watermark across the fakes, and sent it to every invite on our list. Ethan helped double-check the list. Jasmine pressed my shoulder as I hit send. Most people responded within hours. Some apologized, some just said, "I knew something was off." A few offered to help with security if we needed it. That night, Cole sent the final report. The fake email had been created using a free proxy routed through a Wi-Fi network registered to a co-working space in Charlotte. The MAC address matched a laptop previously linked to Sophie's apartment lease. I handed the report to Ethan without saying a word. He scanned it, handed it back and said quietly, "We'll need security at the venue." I didn't need a perfect wedding. I just needed one where no one could take the microphone. That morning, the sky over Charlottesville was clear but still carried the chill of early spring. The garden we'd chosen was tucked behind an old inn. Vines crept lazily along wooden trellises, and lavender bushes lined the stone path like silent ushers. I was getting dressed in a quiet room upstairs when the knock came. One of the security guards we hired, a calm man in his 40s named Lewis, stepped in with a folded earpiece and careful eyes. "We just detained a woman trying to climb the side fence near the parking lot," he said. "Matches the photo you gave us." I didn't ask who, I didn't need to. She had a backpack. Inside were 2 open perfume bottles, a pair of scissors, and a can of spray paint. He waited. I looked down at my dress, smoothing a crease near the waist, then I met his eyes. "Escort her off the property," I said. "No police. Just make sure she doesn't come back." He nodded. "Understood." Then he left, closing the door gently behind him. A soft breeze moved the curtains. I sat for a moment, my hands resting in my lap. I didn't feel angry, not even surprised, just sat in the way one might feel watching a story end badly for someone who refused to change the script. Jasmine came in next. She didn't mention anything about the fence, just handed me my shoes and said, "It's time." The ceremony was held under an archway woven with fresh greenery and lavender. The chairs were arranged in a wide semicircle. No podium, no microphones, just space and quiet. Uncle David walked me down the aisle. As we reached the path, he slipped a small postcard into my palm. I didn't open it right away, but I felt the texture of handwritten ink through the paper. Guests rose as we approached. I didn't scan the crowd for anyone missing. I didn't need to. The ones here were enough. Ethan stood waiting, his suit slightly wrinkled, his expression steady and warm. As I reached him, he whispered, "You look like yourself." The officiant said a few words, simple and kind. Then Ethan and I exchanged vows we wrote. Alone but somehow mirrored each other. No long speeches, no toasts, just this. I will meet you in joy and I will meet you in struggle, and I will choose you in both. The words weren't grand, but they were ours. When the officiant said, "You may kiss," I didn't feel the need to glance around for approval. I didn't brace for interruption. I leaned in, kissed the man I loved, and let that moment belong entirely to me. The crowd clapped. Jasmine wiped a tear. Uncle David gave a quiet thumbs up. Afterward, at the small reception on the lawn, Nina brought me a plate of lemon cake and said, "This is how it should have always been." Later that night, back at our apartment, Ethan and I kicked off our shoes and sat on the couch surrounded by flower wrappings and unopened cards. He turned to me and asked, "Think they'll ever change?" I took a long breath before answering. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not waiting with the door open." The next morning, while Ethan made coffee, I stepped out onto our tiny balcony. The lavender pots we planted last month had just begun to bloom. I watered them slowly, careful not to spill over the edges. Inside, a small card rested against the windowpane, Uncle David's handwriting. "You chose peace, keep choosing it." I smiled, folded the card, and tucked it between the pages of our vow book. Not because I needed a reminder, but because sometimes the truest kind of love is the one we give ourselves when we finally stop asking for permission. Sometimes peace doesn't come with a grand gesture. It comes in quiet mornings in a home you chose beside someone who never asked you to shrink. I didn't win by fighting harder. I won by no longer fighting to be believed in. In families, love can turn into expectation and expectation into control. But real love doesn't demand silence or sacrifice. It honors truth even when it's inconvenient. If we can teach our children anything, let it be this. Dignity is not disobedience and choosing peace is not betrayal. If this story touched something in you, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts, share your experience, or pass it on to someone who might need the reminder. Your voice matters, especially at the table where it's been quiet too long.